Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Deep Learning with Poly AI podcast, the only podcast that not only delivers breaking news in conversational AI and contact center automation, but it might also send one lucky listener a bouquet of flowers this week. Probably not, though.
Could be
I like
not.
to under
Could be you.
deliver. I'm very, very excited to welcome a guest to the podcast, but an old friend at Poly AI, Vice President of Alliances, Michael Chen. Hey, Michael, how are you?
Hey, Damien, thanks for having me. I've been watching with envy the last many weeks that you've had this on, and so I'm excited for my shot here.
This shoot your shot. That's all I have to say because there's no guarantee we're
Yeah.
bringing you back on. So you better impress not only myself but our fair viewers and listeners at home. Michael's been with the company a number of years. Michael, why don't you give us a little bit of a breakdown of what you do at Poly?
Yeah, absolutely. So, VP of Alliances, what do we do? We look at how can we partner with other organizations that are already, key leaders, key advisors to the customers and enterprises that we work with, right? And make sure that they're aware of what we do, right? They're aware of the new innovations that we're bringing to the market. And we go jointly to market either co-sell motions, co-marketing, where we're part of the conversation, right, around transforming customer experience with language models with generative AI.
Yeah, sounds good. Now, obviously, being in that role, you've worked with a number of external agencies like consultancies, cloud providers, other tech companies to sort of formulate that nice little interconnected network of functionality that just adds value to the end customer, right? What is the general consensus among those firms with regards to the potential generative AI? I feel like we always talk about we drink our own Kool-Aid, right? We're out to market because we believe in what we're selling. We talk to our end users, and obviously, if they're interested, they're having deeper conversations as to what we can do or how they can bring generative AI, conversational AI in house to help with automation, with operational excellence, et cetera, competitive advantage. What are these integrators who maybe it's a piece of like a bigger whole for them? What are they saying with regards to the potential there?
I mean, it's slightly different depending on segments, right? So, I mean, I view my world in terms of segments. So we have technology alliances. So, like you mentioned, cloud providers, maybe CRM systems, systems of record, right? Where
Sure.
our AI will be expected to pull data in from or send data to in order to be part of a workflow, right? And um, it's only by being part of a workflow, or it's mostly, I should say, by being part of a workflow that we can deliver true value, business value, right? Because the AI is able to actually update an information so that a human agent doesn't have to do it behind the scenes, right, in a more human loop style, right? So we have
Right.
these type of technology alliances. We also have, like you mentioned, consulting firms, systems integrators. They're more advisory pieces. Now, these companies know a lot, and they've built incredible businesses, really deeply understanding enterprises, really deeply understanding a particular enterprise, a particular sector, the challenges of that sector, right? Where they just have a lot of that expertise to add to us, and we bring the technology around language models, around generative AI. Those partners are layering on, like, hey, this is how it could fit into not just this specific workflow for this industry, but into this particular client, because each client, each enterprise does things slightly differently, even if they're operating in similar spaces or in a particular or the same sector, right? Now,
Yeah.
in terms of conversations around generative, around language models, uh, I had a really interesting stat that I heard the other day. I think it was from Quantum Black, like one of the sort of expert firms out there, right? They mentioned that only about 11% of
Is
AI.
that is that the is that McKinsey?
Yeah,
Is that AI McKinsey?
yeah. I think that's the analytic arm, right? I think of McKinsey, and they mentioned that they saw only about 11% of um, AI applications within an enterprise made it out of sandbox and into production, right? And within that subset, they're
Oh,
seeing
interesting.
with generative, only about 3 to 5% of generative applications made it out of the sandbox environment, right? And so
Now these
that's
are
one
now these
thread of
are
the
these are
conversation.
in
Yeah,
are those in-house developments? Are those in-house projects?
yeah, yeah, in house, right?
Why is it so low?
Um, yeah, so that's a big part of the conversation right now, right? It's
Sure.
amongst businesses, amongst IT leaders. How, like, why, troubleshooting, what's the root cause? How can we improve that percentage? I think in our world, right, at least the world that we understand, right, in customer
Hmm.
experience, particularly in contact center, right, what we've seen is, um, it's really easy for you to test a solution that you've built yourself, right? To understand how you speak, right? But then when you try and put that into production, into how, millions of customers might choose to engage, that's a whole different challenge, right? Like for whatever reason, the human mind is limited in our ability to imagine how other people might interact, the language that other people might use. And so that is a huge challenge getting conversational solutions out of sandbox. They might perform well in a closed test environment, but they falter when they're put into production. It's especially difficult in voice, right? So, you
Yeah,
might have
no
a
doubt.
sandbox chatbot that works really well, very clearly. You're typing to it, the spelling's largely okay. The language model has a clear signal of what you're requesting. Now you add to that speech recognition, you add to that speech recognition errors, you add to that, a telephony line that might have background noise, that might have static.
Sure.
That is a whole order of magnitude in complexity in a production environment that is not as evident in sandbox unless you've had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about environment. It's tough to do environmental recreation on one end of a voice line. When you're fielding like potentially millions of calls, you can't adequately sandbox millions of test environments for all those little nuances of what could negatively affect its various layers of things like natural language understanding and processing. So that makes a ton of sense, and I especially appreciate the difficulties within voice. Right, one
Yeah.
computing environment at an end user terminal is one thing, but whoever's calling in, whatever's going on behind them, and the strength of connection to even their own unique voice itself, it's really really difficult to recreate. So that's interesting. It's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating. It's
Yeah.
so those are obvious with voice, but why is generative AI? Why are generative AI deployments so relegated? I mean, let's even talk about outside of our sweet spot in voice. Why are other things sitting in the sandbox for so long? What is it? Is it a little bit of maybe like executive board hype? Oh, we're hearing about generative
Yeah.
AI. Let's throw a couple dollars toward it. And then, whoa, this is kind of scary. This thing is spitting out hallucinations. I don't even know what that word
Yeah.
means, but I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. Like, what's happening there?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a bit of that, right? It's um, yeah, there's a difference between using ChatGPT for your own personal, like, oh, I wonder if it can like help me summarize this document or this email, right?
Sure. Right.
Versus then going, I put this into like a software development pipeline, right? How do I measure whether a change that I've made to my prompt has improved or actually regressed the performance of that solution, right? Now,
Yeah.
it's interesting because in these, I always think of these natural language software is different to traditional software that enterprises might be used to, right? So there's, enterprises have a lot of experience with ERP systems, with CRM implementations, where there's a lot of customization that goes on, right? They go, hey, I want the drop down menu to be over here rather than over there. I think for my workflow, I need and these set of options in the drop down menu versus ones that come out of the box, right? But it's all still very deterministic, right? So when you build
Wow.
that software, when you customize that software, when I press the first option in the drop down menu, the software does the same thing every time. It's very predictable.
Every
You
single
know
time.
when it regressed, right? You go, oh, okay, when I press that button, it's meant to make this API call. It did not make that API call, therefore there was a regression, right, in performance, and we
Right.
need to relook at that change before we push it into production. Now, with natural language software, there is just an inherent level of probability now that it is not been evident in previous software sort of paradigms, like in this deterministic software. Now it's, I asked the model this and it provided me a certain question. I might ask it the same exact question again, and it might provide just a slightly different response, right? Now, how do you determine whether, and some of those responses might be subjective, right? So, or those answers, right? And it becomes harder and harder to evaluate how to figure out when something has improved or performance is improving. What does continuous improvement look like? And as a result, we're hearing, and I was part of discussions recently with software development teams where, yeah, they were racking their brains to go, hey, I don't, yeah, we haven't quite figured out how to test for regressions, right? And it's a new paradigm that is uncomfortable to the enterprise now. They're having to learn a bit of this and yeah, we're in the again nascent technology, right? It's early days in
Right.
technology. So
And that's the that's the big question is that often, when it comes to these deployments is how do we have this, like you're talking about almost testing protocols in a sandbox. Well, the technology is so new. Like even we don't even have all 100% of the testing protocols down to ensure that every deployment is going to be flawless. I mean, with
yeah,
this great potential comes great responsibility to Spider-Man our tech, right? And and that's what makes it so exciting, but it also makes it terrifying for big business leaders when
yeah,
they're talking about rolling this out at scale. So that makes a
yeah.
ton of sense. What, when it comes to the integrators and whatnot, and some of the tech platforms that we're working at, is there a little bit of a like let's like look at big CCaaS providers because we partner with a number of them, right? So they sort of have a predictable, most often they have an entrenched relationship with end user organizations. It's kind of old school tech, very much in that traditional software environment where you can easily test regressions, et cetera. And now they're like, yeah, we're going to shake things up a bit. We know it's going to deliver value to our end user, to our clients. And we know that there's a tremendous amount of business value in this partnership with someone like Poly AI, but they are bringing in this like risky edge tech. What do we how do they go about, or what's the conversation between you and them when it comes to your go-to-market message as to why these things work well together?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, to your point, right? Like it's scary. It's early days. Everyone's figuring out how to do. Best practices are emerging, right, all the time. I
Mhm.
guess one of the benefits for us is this is all we do, right? So day in day out, we're just deploying these
Yeah, sure.
solutions. We actually see the performance and we're implementing testing and improving testing based on an accumulation of experience rather than just a single sort of point solution, right? And so that's one of the areas where hey they're going, yeah, this is a specialist provider, right? This actually the challenge of providing more automation over the voice channel, given the complexities around language models, around generative AI, around speech recognition. I think the market is going, actually, I want a really specialist partner. I want someone that has not just um, the people that have done it before, but actually has technology that has been optimized for this particular use case, right? Because of its
Sure.
complexity, right? And so that's one lens, and that's one part of our conversations, right? With a lot of our alliance partners and these consulting firm systems integrators, is like, hey, we are. This is all we do, right? This is where we've chosen to focus. We're not going after AGI, right?
Right.
it's yeah, but leave that to the open AIs of the world to feel the AGI. We're here for customer experience. We're here for enterprise use cases. Um, and then the other part, to your point of a contact center environment is a complex tech stack. There are so many
Sure.
solutions involved in there. There's workforce management. There is, the telephony systems. I think there's an opportunity there to think about, well, what is the role of AI, right? What is the role of generative? Now, is it more an agent assist? Is it more in automating the conversations themselves? And we're a best in class provider. We're just a part of that conversation. Say, hey, this is what you could do, right? If it
Right.
makes sense for your business, and we're here to help. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that because obviously, as we take a look at what those either systems integrators or consultancies and implementation partners that come into play, aside from the actual solution providers, like let's take a look at where we could be, sort of a function that's offered.
Yeah.
I've talked with a number of guests in the past about like how we sort of have a love-hate relationship with BPOs of the world, right? And I wouldn't say hate, that's sort of brutal, but
Yeah.
it is seen as a bit of a conflicting relationship because for every function that you automate or for every, subset of calls that you automate, that's less seats that go toward like, let's say a BP
Yeah.
or a shared service contract, right? So we do have those relationships and they work really well because at the end of the day, it's about driving value to the end user, right? Um, so what happens when we're taking a look at the fact that even like figureheads like the CEO over at Tata Consultancy a couple weeks ago put out a press release or spoke at a conference and said, the future of our revenues lies in consulting on generative AI projects. And basically said our existing model of business process outsourcing is kind of going the way of the dodo. Like, where does that leave the conversations? How does that make conversations either more or less awkward for you when it comes to those type of
Yeah.
partnerships and
Um,
alliances?
like I actually think there isn't the tension, right, that people might think in those conversations, right? And the reason I say that
That's good.
is, um, like we all operate in, and I've a tremendous amount of empathy for a contact center or customer experience leader right now, right? It
Yeah.
is a difficult job to staff, right? Whether you're a BPO or whether you're doing it for an in-house call center, right? It is a difficult job, right? It is one that, people have a high turnover rate, right? Like 30, 40% is pretty normal,
Yeah.
right? And part of it is because one, consumers are willing to pay a certain price, right? And it'd be great if we were all willing to pay a lot more for our products and therefore the service could increase, but that's not like reality, right? Things get pushed down over time. And so
Sure.
contact center leaders are having to do and being asked to do more and more and more with less and less and less, right? And that affects not just the contact center leader, but I imagine BPO outsources as well, right? Like they
Oh
have
yeah.
to also do more or less. They also have to manage all of this retention. And one of the threads of conversation I hear in the industry is we need to create more sustainable career paths for a customer service or a customer support agent, right? And I think the way to do that, the starting point of doing that is getting them into more value added troubleshooting, value added tasks, right? And that means, we joke like in it internally, right, Damien, about like, hey, we just want to reset passwords, right? Like that's like the stuff we want to do, right? But
Yeah. Yeah.
that is one thread of the challenge in this industry is that is not interesting work, right? Being asked to clock in, clock out every day and help people reset passwords. Right now, if
Exactly.
AI can take that away, we can resolve that. Then, we can help whether it's an enterprise like their in-house support teams or whether it's a BPO processor, elevate into higher value work, create more meaningful careers for these
Right.
roles. I think that's part of the solution because I think that the trends are that there are just fewer and fewer people that want to do customer support jobs. But
Yeah.
the complexity of products keeps increasing, or the complexity of our world keeps increasing, and there's more support inquiries, right? So
Right.
it's a
And
bit of a rock and a
to your
hard
point,
place. Yeah.
the concept of an entry level agent, I think historically has come with that, for every 10 calls you take, which requires some level of empathy and critical thinking and problem solving, you're getting 90 calls that are reset my password or why isn't this working or where's my order or
Yeah.
something like that. And so that's contributed to why that sort of a career path is so like non sought out or not sought
Yeah.
after. It's just it's pretty mundane and people don't want mundane work. But fortunately, like back in the day, the idea of going to business processing or to go into a BPO was that you just needed to create some instant cost savings. And sometimes that came at the expense of things like or being on brand or maintaining an utmost customer experience. And now those tides are shifting a little bit. Um, you know, Contact center is seen as a value center, not a cost center. And so because of that, there's more investments to be made if the investments benefit the end user than customer. And so I think
Yeah.
that entire dynamic and that paradigm
Yeah.
shift has
Yeah.
definitely contributed
Yeah.
to being more like, hey, not only are you answering the calls at like, negotiating per minute costs or how many seats you got, but you got to bring an on brand experience. And that's not something that
Yeah.
historically BPOs have been known for.
And you can be a bit more creative maybe in that space, right? Everyone wants to enter more
Yeah.
creative work, I feel, right? That's more high value work. If your training agents and if your contact center agents have more time to spend and actually troubleshoot, get to know the customer more, well, guess what? They're actually in a better position to have an advisory conversation and go, hey, actually, you have this pain point. Have you considered this other product? And then that's how I think you start to turn the experience right into not just a cost center. It's not just something that you have to provide, right? But it is actually a valuable interaction to have with a customer. You get to learn a bit more about them, and you get to have a few more sort of data points about what they care about and what they struggle with.
Amazing. What are some of the more recent, let's do a little self backpat here. What are some of the more recent partnerships or alliances that we've struck up that you think are really exciting and you can't wait to see how it fleshes out over the course of the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'll shout out some of our friends at AWS, right? They're a big sort of one of our big cloud providing partners there.
Yeah, I heard of
We
them.
have some exciting, yeah. I think started by a little known person named Jeff Bezos, I believe. Yeah, we got some really exciting things cooking this year. We're doing a lot already with their contact in the platform and Amazon Connect, and so there's more to come. Watch this space in that partnership.
That's very cool. All right. Cool. Michael, I really appreciate you coming on the show. This was great. I can't wait to have you back. I think you passed the guest test. So you will definitely be getting an invite to come back sooner rather than later. So I appreciate all the insights that you've had. And for those of you listening at home, we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Great, great. Thanks, Damien. Thanks, everyone.